Imagine how awkward that would have been had the British won the battle. Now they're sitting on territory that technically they shouldn't have. Are you going to give it back? I mean, there was a reason they were there for that. So in our day and time, we have much better communication, but that was a fact of life throughout most of human history. Now I'm lost. That's okay. Paper copy. So, all right, let's move on then. Verses 3 through 13 are Hebrew poetry and are sometimes referred to as the cooking pot song because it resembles the rhythm of Hebrew singing. Now, how many popular songs in our culture have involved a cooking pot? Who sings an ode to the crock pot? I love the crock pot, but I've never sang an ode about one. It's not one of those things we do, but that's what this thing kind of refers to, and it's actually a reflection of a saying that we encountered earlier in Ezekiel 11:3, where the proverb was, "The city is the pot, and we are the flesh." Well, guess what? The city really is the pot, isn't it? The elements of the earlier saying are all present. The city really is the pot. They are the flesh and the bones being boiled in the pot, and Babylon is the fire that's cooking the pot. Now, the difference is, in this case is when they were using it back in Ezekiel 11:3, they were kind of talking about something that would have a hopefully positive outcome, something to the effect of, well, this is really tough right now, but when it's all said and done, we're going to be okay and we're going to be better for it. No, you're not. Not going to happen. In Ezekiel 11, that pot was made of clay. That's what they typically cooked in, but you'll notice down in verse 11 here, this pot is made of bronze. Now, two things about that. You want to cook things steady. You want to have a very thick material that holds heat well. The difference between an expensive cooking pan and a cheap cooking pan is usually that the cheap cooking pan is made of much thinner metal. You have a good cooking pan, it takes longer to heat it up, but it cooks more evenly, and it does a better job of it. I use cheap pans because I'm kind of cheap. I cook on hot spots and things like that, but that's why you do that sort of a thing. Here, with this being in bronze, they're going to be able to heat it much, much harder than they would be able to do with a clay pot. So this is going to be bad here. So the basic parts of the cooking process are here. Put the good parts in the pot. You'll notice they make a special mention of bones going into the pot. Apparently bone broth is all the rage right now amongst some people, and I don't get it, but that's okay. It's not my, it's not my thing. They'll take care of it. But you put that in there, all of these things, you throw in the spices, and then you let it cook for a while. That part I'm familiar with, and I do that myself in the crock pot or the Instant Pots or things like that, much as most of you do. So everything is there, to do the proper cooking, but we're going to get it really hot. Notice the emphasis on, first of all, in verse 6, that there is rust or corruption or something in the pot that doesn't belong there that makes it unfit for cooking. And the pot, because of this corruption, the pot must be cleaned out. Also, there's a mention in verses 7 and 8 that the blood of the flesh has not been treated with respect here. That comes from Leviticus chapter 13, or chapter 17, 13 through 14. So when any man from the sons of Israel or from the aliens who sojourned among them in hunting catches a beast or a bird which may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For as the life of all flesh, its blood is identified with its life. So the blood was to be treated this way, and you notice in Ezekiel what they poured out on. A rock. They didn't cover it, did they? They didn't put it in the earth to get it absorbed in there. They didn't cover it. And why would you do that? Because you don't respect it. And really, Jerusalem at this particular time, they're shedding their own blood amongst each other with these quarrels and strifes and political machinations and things like that, that there's too much to cover. Not a good situation for them. Because the pot is unclean and its contents therefore unfit for consumption, the pot must be sterilized by fire. So how would you do that?
Get it really hot and burn away.
Yep, get it really hot, let it burn. And it's metal, so it can hold that heat. And because it's metal, it's going to glow. It's going to turn red. It's going to be very, very visible that this is a hot pot. And that's your cue that you don't want to touch this thing at all until it's cool. But it will do that. We actually have a device in our homes that operates on the same principle, the self-cleaning oven. You ever used it? Older one I used to have, I don't know about the one that we have right now, but you have to lock a handle on there and you put it in clean mode and you go walk away for 45 minutes or so while it did that, and then when it was done, it was cool, you come in there and just wipe the grit out of it and you have a perfectly clean oven. It's the same principle here, what they're doing here. The pot is unclean, it's corrupt, the things that are in it are corrupt, and we got to get it all out of there. So we're going to heat it really hot. In verses 12 through 14, all of God's efforts to bring spiritual restoration, and here are the three techniques that he used. The law of Moses told them how to worship, where to worship, and some specifics about the what not to worship. Don't go to the high places, don't go to the Asherah. I'm on a medication right now that makes my mouth dry, so I'm having a little bit trouble with that, but I'll live. So, okay, so we have the law, number one, and number two, we have the message of the prophets. This was what Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and all of the prophets in the Old Testament were telling them. You need to align yourself with God, you need to follow the law, you need to do these things, and here's how you should behave in this situation, and all will be well with you. And then finally, their own history. The previous acts of judgment have proven fruitless. They saw the cycle of the judges, the sin, apostasy, punishment, redemption type cycle there. They've seen it in, amongst themselves. They saw what happened to the northern kingdom. And from none of these things did they learn anything at all. All three of these portions of evidence were available to them. They didn't learn anything, and therefore judgment will come without restraint, pity, or relent. And they have put God in the position of this is the only way he can deal with it. So, kind of brings to my mind a little history lesson that maybe we all need to learn from time to time and think about. Don't put God in that position. He's trying to avoid having to do that through Christ. And so, that would be a much better alternative for all of us, part of why we're here. Okay, any questions or comments before we go on?
I think it might just be interesting to remind ourselves that God is righteous while he's doing this.
Mm-hmm.
His righteousness demands it. I know that's hard for us to understand.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Probably have to hold it. I don't think I can set it on anything and not spill it. Yeah, God is being righteous in here in doing this. This was not God having a little hissy fit or getting up on the wrong side of the bed one morning. This is a deliberate choice that's required of God because he is righteous, and in order, really, he has to do this or Christ can't come into the world. That's really what it boils down to in this case. This doesn't happen, Christ doesn't come. Matt?
All right, I wasn't going to say it, but you just set me up on a tee here. So I'm thinking about Christ coming down the pike and how all of this history has happened, and he's preserved a remnant through this to bring Christ, to save people. And Christ comes and his own reject him as a whole. How did he maintain his poise and composure is beyond me,
Yeah.
He was angry with them on occasions, right? But he came in grace and truth and actually fulfilled his ministry to die for people. They were spitting on him as he went to the cross. So it's like the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, these religious groups and sects just didn't put the history together and see Christ come. And it made it that much more despicable that they put him on a cross.
Yeah. Yeah, and the good news was once they got through this whole, exile and, restoration and all that kind of thing like that, never had a problem with idolatry after that. They were really good about not, following idolatry, but they developed the problem with self-righteousness instead.
And it made it that much more marvelous than he went to the cross.
Yeah. And when you look at it, idolatry was really dangerous, wasn't it? Self-righteousness may be even more dangerous. I mean, the being wrapped up in this sense that I'm really one of the good guys and maybe you're not or what have you. And how do you teach something about morality or what God has to say to somebody who's already self-assured in their own righteousness? That makes the task difficult. But again, like Matt said, that's the world he came into, and he maintained his composure in spite of it all. All right, let's have a volunteer read verses 15 through 20. Okay, go ahead. You're reading or you're asking a question?
Okay. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, with one blow I am about to take away from you the delight of your eyes. Yet do not lament or weep or shed any tears. Groan quietly, do not mourn for the dead. Keep your turban fastened and your sandals on your feet. Do not cover your mustache or beard or eat the customary food of mourners. So I spoke to the people in the morning, and in the evening my wife died. The next morning I did as I had been commanded. Then the people asked me, won't you tell us what these things have to do with us? Why are you acting like this? So I said to them, the word of the Lord came to me. Say to the people of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to desecrate my sanctuary, the stronghold in which you take pride, the delight of your eyes, the object of your affection. The sons and daughters you left behind will fall by the sword, and you will do as I have done. You will not cover your mustache and beard or eat the customary food of mourners. You will keep your turbans on your heads and your sandals on your feet. You will not mourn or weep, but will waste away because of your sins and groan among yourselves. Ezekiel will be a sign to you. You will do just as he has done. When this happens, you will know that I am the sovereign Lord.
Okay. This is a tragic incident in the life of Ezekiel. There is zero evidence in anything in this text or anywhere else in the scripture that I am aware of that indicates either Ezekiel or his wife actually did anything wrong. And yet this type of a thing has happened here because it's a sign. And sometimes suffering is a result of sin, but sometimes suffering has another motive involved in it. And this is one of those times where there's another motive.
She didn't just die of like old age.
Right. Well, yeah, the Hebrews are a little bit particular on that, and I'll get into that in just a second here. This is the final announcement of judgment against Judah and Jerusalem, and this is probably, obviously, the most painful for Ezekiel, because even though he had some skin in the game, you could say, now something important to him is taken from him in this. And in this verse, we learn that the desire of your eyes will be taken from Ezekiel, but he will not be permitted to mourn. Now, I highlighted that phrase up on the PowerPoint there because what do you think that tells us about their relationship? It was a good relationship. You know, they delighted in each other. These people are exiles in a foreign land who were transported there against their will, but they've been treated pretty, with reasonable hospitality, I guess you could say. And they're getting along fine, but they are exiles in a land that's not their own, and they have this relationship that by all accounts that we can see was a good relationship. It's the thing that we all should be striving for in our marital relationship. And then she's taken from him. The description that she will be taken with a blow indicates that her death will be sudden and unexpected. Now, typically, when we think about dying, I think the one that maybe we all dread is the one that's like the long-term type of an illness where our minds waste away or our bodies waste away, or you're constantly in pain or something like that. And that's bad. For those who have lost loved ones like that was my father's tale there. It kind of gives you a chance to adjust to it, doesn't it? At least you know it's coming. It still hurts, but at least you know it's coming. Taken with a blow, that could be a sudden onset illness. Somebody collapsed and had an aneurysm, a heart attack, and we didn't even know they were sick. Maybe they didn't even know they were sick. The result of an accident. Work site, traffic, what have you, could be that. A victim of a violent confrontation. Shooting each other in America seems to be a very popular thing to do right now, and so, that's would come under this category of with the blow. So how did she die? Probably sudden illness, but we don't know. It was just fast and unexpected, and now Ezekiel has to deal with this. But he is told to mourn silently and not show any of the customary signs of mourning there. So he's not to dress like a mourner, he's not to act like a mourner, he's not to do any of the things that people who are in mourning do. Now, mourning customs actually have a use, don't they? You lose somebody that's close to you, and if you follow the customs of the land that we live in here, which right now I don't think is really anything particular anymore that we do, but it lets other people know that if you're trying to deal with me, I'm not in a good emotional and mental state right now. So be gentle, be compassionate. And Ezekiel can't do that. All they can see is that, his wife has died and he's not showing any signs of the mourning. And when you get down to, well, I did want to mention Leviticus 21 verses 1 through 6. Priests, which Ezekiel is, he's a priest, are limited from showing the signs of mourning to only very close family members. And as a rule, priests were not supposed to touch the dead at all. So that's part of their service. What I thought was kind of interesting here in verse 18, during the morning, Ezekiel told the people around him what was about to happen. Then that evening, his wife died. And then the next morning, Ezekiel did what he was commanded. Look at verse 19. Look at that. Look at that question. Anything in that question strike you as odd?
Well, Ezekiel's behavior is odd.
It is. Did anybody walk up and say, Ezekiel, I am so sorry this happened to you? No, it did not, did they? So if Gary loses a loved one there, and I can see he's in mourning, Gary, would you stop it? You're kind of inconvenience us. You're an inconvenience, you're bringing us all down here, things like that. That's kind of the callousness that you see here. What does this mean to us? It's your wife that died, what does this mean to us? And so he has to tell them what this means to us. Ezekiel is a sign to the exiles about what God is about to do to Jerusalem. He's going to destroy Jerusalem and he's going to destroy the temple. Even though these people were an idolatrous people, they were very proud of that temple. Just like every other pagan nation around them was very proud of the temples that they had there. We were God's people, we were Yahweh's people, and we have Yahweh's temple, and that's sacred to us and we value it. But you remember when we looked in Ezekiel 8 through 11, chapters 8 through 11, when Ezekiel had the vision of going to the temple, what did he find there? Idolatry. Every room he went to in the temple in that vision was full of idolatry, and everybody he saw in this vision in the temple was worshiping idolatry. So they hadn't really maintained their uniqueness as being God's people in there. And so God says, I'm going to destroy it. Not Babylon, not anybody else. I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to cleanse the pot. I'm going to heat it up, and we're going to get the crud, the dirt, the filth out of there, and then we're going to start over. And those who survived the destruction of the city would not be permitted to show any signs of mourning themselves. Now think about this. There were 3 captivities of Judah. The first one occurred in about 606 BC when the Babylonians came down to just seize control of the city. Jerusalem, Judah hadn't done anything wrong. They were just in a good location for the Babylonians to keep an eye on Egypt. And they took some of the best and the brightest of the nobility, Daniel, Azariah, and his friends, and back to Babylon, probably very humanely, to train them and make them, loyal servants of the Babylonian Empire here. And then in the second captivity, when they come to Jerusalem, that was a result of a rebellion, and they came to put that down. And Jerusalem actually surrendered before the Babylonians could lay siege to the city. And they took Ezekiel and a lot of people like that back to Babylon, but they didn't brutalize anybody. The third captivity will come on the heels of the second major rebellion by Judah, and probably when they had the first one, the Babylonians came in and said, we better not have to come back here again to deal with this problem. And here they are that have had to walk thousands of miles and maintain an army thousands of miles away from home so they could build siege walls and things around this city then for 2 and 2.5 years be on this site destroying this city. You think they're going to be irritated? Yeah. So for this third group of exiles, they will get the full brutality of the treatment. They will be the ones who are stripped down naked. They are the ones who will walk into captive trains. I don't know if the Babylonians put hooks in their jaws like the Assyrians, but I don't know that they didn't either. They were very Assyrian-like in the way that they conducted their sieges and their captivities and things like that. You're going to get the full experience this time, and it's going to be brutal. You think you're going to come out of this with a little post-traumatic stress disorder? How could you not? To see people around you that you loved being murdered, killed right before your very eyes, and then to have yourself be treated this way, the only thing that's keeping you alive at that particular point is your survival instinct. Because they'd be more than happy to take you out if you don't want to go. Clayton?
Getting stuck on the desire of your eyes, part of Ezekiel. We're coming from the one side perspective that people aren't going to be able to mourn when they're in exile, they're losing their temple, which they love, and all that. But then you got God's side. Mm-hmm. God's desire was for the people. God's desire was for that relationship, for that. And he's having to mourn without mourning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're going to exile. He's not going to be able to mourn. He's seeing them suffer. He's going through that. So the mourning that he's going through for the people, he knows his people are suffering at that time. He knows they're going through this at that point. But he knows there's a purpose to it at the end.
Yeah.
So there's that other side of God as well, the desire of the eyes, as Ezekiel represented the people, but I think there's also the God perspective of his people.
Yeah, he's in mourning too. You are correct on that. How many of you have ever enjoyed punishing your children for their misbehavior? Anybody? Didn't say did they need it or not. Did you enjoy it? If you did, you're doing it wrong. If you enjoy punishing your children, you're doing it wrong. I mean, this is one of the things as a parent, you have to look at a situation and say, how do I get this behavior corrected without killing this child that at times acts like it desperately needs to be killed? You know, that's, welcome to parenthood. They'll live, you'll live. But it's, we don't enjoy it. I never did enjoy punishing my children. I got irritated at them and things like that. I lectured them hard and, concocted various forms of retribution on them that were not life-threatening in any way, shape, or form, but were unpleasant. You'd be surprised what taking a game controller will do to a kid. Take it away from you. You can't play with the game controller. Oh, man. You're cruel, Adolf. But from the divine perspective, that's what he's having to do. This is exactly what he is having to deal with here. And it's funny when you talk about it from the parental perspective, but God enjoyed it even less. I mean, when we're punishing a child right here, we're exercising control or altering temporal behavior. God's looking at this from eternity. And he's doing this because they left him no other choice. So, the big question in this passage is, who is going to be unable to mourn? And what's Ezekiel's audience for this statement? Ezekiel is addressing the exiles with him. Are they the ones who will be unable to mourn? Or is it going to be the survivors of the destruction of Jerusalem that are going to be unable to mourn? Studied a lot of commentators on this, and I didn't get a really good, concise answer. Why not both? Why not both? When Jerusalem falls, the survivors will have witnessed a horror that was unimaginable to them. And they will be forced to mourn silently. Nobody cares when you're in a captive train that you feel bad because you lost your kid, you lost your spouse, you lost your mom or your dad or anything like that. You're in this captive train, you're going to Babylon, and you're going to live there the rest of your life. If you don't like it, just give the word and I'll run a sword through your gut and somebody else, I mean, it's really that brutal, that simple here. While the exiles would have opportunity to express their grief, normal modes of mourning would likely be inadequate. The example I gave earlier, somebody dying from a long-term illness, we do have a chance to brace ourselves for that, don't we? The sudden ones, the unexpected ones, if it's a child, if it's a loved one or something like that, how do you, you haven't even thought about a funeral because you didn't even know you needed to do that at that particular time. So that's, that's a difficult thing to deal with, and that's, how do you mourn under those circumstances? I don't have an easy answer for you. And so when something that is completely unthinkable happens, how does one deal with it? These people do not believe that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. This precious temple that they love, it's still going to be there somehow or another. It's all going to work out, and they've had lots of false prophets and lots of signs and portents and, other idols and things like that we're all telling them it's all going to be okay. And now it's not. How do you deal with it? That's, a crushing of expectations that would be very difficult for anyone to deal with. Questions or comments? All right, let's have a volunteer close us out by reading 25 through 27 of the chapter, please. Sharon?
As for you, son of man, know that on that day I will take from them their stronghold, their pride and joy, the delight of their eyes, and the longing of their hearts, as well as their sons and daughters. On that day a fugitive will come to you and report the news. On that day your mouth will be open to talk with him. You will speak and no longer be mute. So you will be a sign for them, and they will know that I am the Lord.
Okay. This particular passage here is addressed to Son of Man. So this is God really talking to Ezekiel about what's going to happen. So the siege has begun. Nobody knows it, but eventually they're going to find out. And then several months after the siege is concluded successfully, they're going to find out that Jerusalem has fallen. And when that happens, things are about to change. In Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 25 through 27, when Ezekiel was commissioned, this is what it says. As for you, son of man, they will put ropes on you and bind you with them so that you cannot go out among them. Moreover, I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth so that you will be dumb and cannot be a man who rebukes them, for they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth and you will say to them, thus says the Lord your God, he who hears, let him hear, and he who refuses, let him refuse, for they are a rebellious house. So the restriction placed on Ezekiel when he was originally commissioned was he's going to stay at home. He would only speak when God told him to speak. And if anybody wanted to hear anything he had to say, you're going to come to him. He's not going to come out and find you and give you that message. So up to this point in chapter 24, everything that Ezekiel has done has taken place in his house or started in his house. So when he poked the hole in the wall to make the baggage train to go on exile, he started it in the house with the baggage train, and he opened the door, he went outside, poked a hole in the wall and went through it. But other than that, he was in his house the whole time. They came and they, out of curiosity or just interest or boredom or what have you, perhaps some belief in some cases, and they talked to him there. And anyone who was curious about him, talked to him there. Ezekiel has been predicting the fall of Jerusalem for at least 3 years, and now the siege has begun. It will take 24 to 30 months for it to be resolved. When that happens and when they get word of the success of the siege back to the exiles, Ezekiel will now be free to move among the people and openly deliver his message. So the captivity of the nation now becomes freedom for Ezekiel. And what does that tell them about who's in charge? God. God placed the constraints on Ezekiel, and he served faithfully in the constraints that were placed on him. And now when this finally comes to an end, Ezekiel will go out among the people and serve faithfully, again guided by the constraints that God is going to place on him at that time. Yes?
So was Ezekiel captured too? No.
Well, he was in the second captivity.
But in this one, I mean.
No, he's not being held involuntarily. He is acting as if he has been held involuntarily. So he stays in his house, and God will talk to him there, and sometimes he will do things. He does these little, performance parables and things that, in his house, and people can come and watch and observe and ask questions if they want to. But Ezekiel doesn't go out among them for this. And so he's actually going to, basically operate out of his living room, if that's what they have back then, for about 5.5 years.
As a captive.
As a captive, yes. And then when they finally get word that Jerusalem has fallen, he's going to come out. So, any other thoughts or questions? This is tough stuff. And this is Ezekiel being as faithful as he can, and it did cost him something in this particular case. We can mourn with him a little bit on that. Entirely appropriate. But this is what God had to do in order to get the Christ to come. This people can't do it right now. They don't have a chance of being the kind of people who can bring the Christ into the world. And so, this is what has to be done. Yes.
I was just thinking, he didn't even question God about his wife.
No, he didn't.
And they questioned nothing that happened to him. So there's some real practical lessons for us to perhaps learn.
Yeah.
About our trust in the Lord.
Yeah. I mean, I've asked why. Why did this happen or go down this particular way and stuff like that? And because it had to. It had to. Any other thoughts, comments? I don't have a reading assignment for you next week because we're going to spend a little bit of time looking in the periphery of Ezekiel and some of the other prophets on what about the nations? God was God of Israel and Judah, wasn't he? He's also sovereign over all the nations, so what about them? So that's going to be our topic next week, and looking forward to that. So appreciate your attention and your comments, and we'll see y'all then.